Building on Dan's great talk, I have an opportunity now to sit down with a couple really seasoned people, deal makers that have been involved both in the US, Israel, and abroad. I think Dan did a phenomenal job giving us some of that data and some of that underlying understanding of the trends in Israel. We're going to continue that conversation now and talk about deal making in the digital age. Sanjay, perhaps you can get us started if you don't mind. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks, Zeev, for having us here. Sanjay, Jain. I'm currently the Chief Strategy Officer at a company called Hyperloop Transportation Technologies. We'll talk about that a little bit today. I've also got a panel tomorrow. We'll dive into it. I'm, however, a reformed investment banker. I've been with this company for a couple of months, actually. I spent the prior 20 years with JP Morgan, most recently running our tech investment banking business, working across M&A, IPOs, et cetera. I worked across the tech industry with a particular focus on software. I ran our software business globally for a few years, and I've worked for the firm in London, San Francisco, and New York.
Excellent. Michael, if you don't mind, please, the same.
Sure. So I've been around the mobility space in a variety of ways for about the last 15 years. I've lived in Israel for the last 6 years. Many people here probably know is associated with a with one of Israel's kind of most infamous attempts, a company called Better Place, to build an electric vehicle network across countries. And it really coming out of that, began to understand that I got involved in that effort because of deep conviction that electrification of vehicles was ultimately inevitable. And on the other side of that, I actually maintained that conviction, but then understood that at this point in time, 2013, 14, Uber was becoming extremely mainstream. Google was unveiling their efforts to create a self-driving vehicle. All new cars were coming equipped with modems, and really I began to understand what we were really seeing was a broader digitization of transportation. And it turns out Israel is very uniquely qualified to contribute to that effort. I began to see a lot of companies, and so we set up a fund, Maniv Mobility, that has now a portfolio of 26 companies, 19 based in Israel, all around automotive and mobility technology.
That's great. So thank you both. That's a really great opening and giving everyone a chance for some context. So Sanjay, maybe beginning with you. So obviously coming out of investment banking landscape, you had worked with a lot of companies. Dan mentioned it earlier, Microsoft for $300 million purchased an Israeli company overnight called Dynamic Yield. A couple folks in the room are involved with that. Congratulations to you guys.
It was McDonald's that bought the company.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
McDonald's, not Microsoft.
Oh, I'm so sorry, McDonald's.
But that's a fascinating point, right?
Well, good segue,
your mind just automatically went to Microsoft,
well,
and the hamburger company bought this.
That's interesting. So McDonald's, but an AI company. And that's actually where I was headed with. We're kind of seeing some new entrants. You know, nobody 5 years ago, 10 years would have said, I'm going to sell my company to McDonald's, right? We wouldn't have thought of them as a player, let alone in Israel, right? So if the golden archers are buying in Israel, to me, I think it signals a shift in what we may call traditional industry. So take a crack at the question of, in terms of this concept of digital transformation, deal making in the digital age, what do you see that's kind of going on big picture?
Yeah, look, I think it's a trend that we've been seeing for the last decade, and it's growing. And Dan referenced some of it, and there are a number of folks in this audience I know who are part of corporate venture teams. The thirst for innovation inside these companies to change from within has proliferated, right? You just can't keep up, and that sort of not invented here mentality is out the window. I fought that for 20 years in investment banking, trying to get corporate business development teams to lean forward and say, we've got to get this talent, this product, this capability in-house. And now you're just seeing the manifestation of that with the transactions that we're seeing. And you're seeing, I'll just pick one that's completely irrelevant to this crowd, but the Juul investment that was made, I think with Marlboro, right? I mean, they're investing an enormous amount of money and paying a huge price for a company that, if it succeeds, should put them out of business in their core offering, right? Those are the kinds of trends that we've been seeing at least for a decade, and I think they're just getting to the point where they're very, very prevalent.
Michael, and same question for you. So either limited to the transportation sector or more broadly, what are you seeing out of kind of these large corporations? How are they approaching this opportunity to kind of grow inorganically through innovation?
Well, just a few years ago, it would have been a laugh line for an automotive company to say, what's our Israel strategy?
But four cars a year sold in the country or something like that?
But in fact, that's exactly the question that's been asked over the last couple of years now. And GM is kind of the outlier here. They set up shop in Israel with an R&D center, amazingly, in the year 2008, same year as their bankruptcy, and it's now grown to over 300 engineers.
Wow.
But really, every global automaker and major automotive supplier is now we host in our office in Tel Aviv, I would say at least on a weekly basis, delegations from auto companies around the world. We're lucky to have many of them actually as investors in our fund, and all of them are seeing that being exposed to the innovation coming out of Israel's digital sector is critical to their future.
And staying on that for another moment, if you could take us on a journey around the world, maybe what are some of the trends or insights you might see out of Asia compared with Europe, compared with North America? How are either the corporations or the startups kind of looking at tackling this kind of next wave that's coming?
Well, it's a very dynamic picture. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think that we kind of got conditioned to kind of the height of the Gardner curve on robotic taxis. Brad Templeton is in the audience. He's one of the people who identified this very early on as a technology and cultural direction. And while I think many of us still believe that fully automated vehicles are a big part of the future, clearly at CES and other gatherings recently, people are acknowledging that as far as sort of level 4 automation, we're in the trough of disillusionment now before we come back out into the plateau of productivity as it goes. But what I've seen really is that there's what it's really about is diversification. How many people here have taken a scooter in the last year as transportation? In Tel Aviv, you can't avoid them. It's becoming Scooter City. I think there's 5 different brands now that are proliferating across Tel Aviv, and I see them everywhere I go now. So I think, and we see automakers actually. Ford bought one of these scooter companies. Lyft bought a scooter company. Uber bought a bike company. I think what we're really going to see is a diversification in transportation options enabled by digital technologies, and these come in all factors, from business model innovation to vehicle architecture, and they're all really based on electrification at their core. And especially in an urbanizing world where we're not building a lot more roads, and that's not becoming overproductive, and there's a demographic that's not that infatuated with car ownership, and finding oftentimes car ownership is more of a burden than it's worth. This is the direction things seem to be moving, and the automotive companies, as you say, are embracing it in ways that they never would have in the past.
Sanjay, I think that's actually a great cue for you guys. And so Mike talked a little bit about some of the changing infrastructure. I think Hyperloop has a vision for what a different take on that infrastructure could look like. Can you share with us a little bit more about what you're seeing? And then a question that those who may be familiar with it, where does vision meet reality? Yeah,
sure. So vision meets reality. We're taking signups right now. So come put your name on a list. My partner Andrea is here, and he's taking deposits as well. So if you want to get on the list, we can make vision into reality. So look, our view on Hyperloop is the world of transportation, the modes of transportation haven't evolved in 50 or 100 years, right? We've been using the same ones. Yes, there's advances in technology pieces, but to create a completely new transportation mode is unheard of in any of our lifetimes. And so our vision is to capture the real big problems of society today. There are a lot, but the ones that I would focus on are our major cities are increasingly overpopulated, overcrowded, congested. Traffic is soul-sucking. Just go up and down 101 and 280 for 5 minutes and you'll feel it, let alone get into the city. So the notion of not only the speed of getting from point A to point B in a Hyperloop system, but the ability to change the very way we live, work, travel, commute, et cetera, is a big part of our vision.
And just in case someone in the room may not be familiar, give us a 10-second Hyperloop introduction 101.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole notion of a Hyperloop system is a capsule inside a completely enclosed tube from which you remove all of the air. It's a near vacuum environment. The capsule levitates on magnets, and as a consequence of removing the friction of the rail and the resistance of the air, you're able to move that capsule at the speed of sound, 800 miles an hour. High-speed rail moves at 200 miles an hour, just to give you a kind of relative contrast. That's LA to San Francisco in 30 minutes.
Wow. Tel Aviv to Eilat in 7 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and one of the really interesting things about Hyperloop is everything you're talking about, digital, fully autonomous system, right? We're using AI, we've got machine learning, we're using blockchain technology, all the buzzwords you hear about today, driving technology changes, are all embedded within what will be the vision of a Hyperloop system.
So Michael, let's continue this. So in the not too distant future, what does our day in the life actually look like? Are we taking our Hyperloop to work? Probably not. Are we riding a driverless taxi? Probably. Kind of. What are you seeing? What do you think is, again, the reality of what's coming soon? In the near future.
As I said, I think the word is really a diversification. Really, if you think about from the introduction of the Model T in 1908 until the financial crisis of 2008, it was really one size fits all. You bought a vehicle, that was your vehicle or your family's vehicle, and you took that vehicle and did everything with it, from going to work to going on trips, etc. Really interestingly, I think in 2008, aside from the financial crisis that hit the automotive industry particularly hard, we also had the first third-party smartphone apps, among which were Waze and Uber, and really, I think the beginning of what will come to be seen as digitization of transportation, just as communication information got digitized in the decades just before that. And so, for me personally, I have a pretty typical suburban urban commute now from outside of Tel Aviv into the city. Most of my contemporaries drive cars, and I think they're crazy. And actually, they tend to agree with me when I lay it out for them, but at the same time, these habits do seem hard to break. There seems to be a bit of, as Dan Ariely describes it, predictive irrationality that particularly applies to mobility. So I think it's hard to understand exactly when some of these sort of cost and convenience issues are going to catch up with reality.
Sanjay, please.
So to add to that, I think that's exactly right. Don't mistake the notion of these new modes of transportation as necessarily cannibalizing everything that exists today, right? I mean, Raj is here from JetBlue Ventures. He'll talk about the what's going on in the airline industry. But we're thinking about intermodal connectivity. So your ride-sharing service, which I'm not going to name any because you get in trouble if you name one and don't name the other. By the way, JP Morgan's taking Lyft public.
Can we sign up for that too, or not yet?
Not allowed. So you've got your Lyft to maybe your Hyperloop to maybe get down to LA to catch an international flight. I mean, that seamless intermodal experience is how everyone should be thinking about their future. Is there a Hyperloop solution that's within a city construct? So what we call an urban Hyperloop versus LA to San Francisco? Yeah, because it's very energy efficient. We didn't even talk about
Is that like a subway?
It's like a subway, absolutely, or like cable car equivalent. But I think you really have to think about transportation in the future, benefiting from all of these things that you're talking about and how they can be connected in an intermodal solution that at the end of the day is about improving the customer experience, the traveler experience.
So staying true to this panel on deal making, where for the folks that are in this room looking at trends, innovations, opportunities, where are the gaps? What are the things that we need to invest in today to be able to profit from if that world comes to reality tomorrow?
Me? You?
Either.
We can start.
Well, look, I think it's all the pieces we've been talking about that everyone knows, AI, et cetera. But I think the one thing that continues to get lost in the conversation is our experience as travelers, as customers, right, as consumers of the travel experience. And I totally agree. I've given up my cars, right? I live in the city of San Francisco. But how do you invest in technologies that make the customer experience better? So those are things like security, right? Biometric screening, et cetera. How do you make the time you spend in your travel pod, whether that's in your Lyft or your Hyperloop or your JetBlue airline, how do you make that experience more efficient for each one of us? And also, how do you continue to bring the cost down, right? And there's different ways to monetize each one of us, and they're actually not the same between you and me, for example. So I think technologies that are investing in those customer experiences ought not to be overlooked as opportunities. That's a gap.
And same for you. What are you investing in? What do you find appealing?
Well, what we're investing in these days are a lot of software, sensors, cybersecurity. We have two of our cybersecurity portfolio companies here today. But what I think might be interesting as we move through the next several years is what are going to be the second-order implications of new mobility. Second-order implications of the automotive age we all are very familiar with, big box stores and fast food and motels and so much else. And I think we'll see not less of a disruption that permeates throughout the economy as we see when other huge aspects of life got digitized. And I think, looking at those things, whether it be real estate, retail, and so forth, are going to be very interesting opportunities in the years ahead.
So let's play that out for a moment. McDonald's, I think, could be argued like as a second-order acquirer.
Yeah.
Who are the global corporates that now enter into this space? I'm making this up. Netflix acquires Hyperloop to have a seamless entertainment experience. Watch one movie on the way. I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
Listen, for $5 billion, I can do that deal tomorrow. it's not
I'll call
a
Reed.
And they have the cash to do it. But it's hard for me to think at the moment of the right transactions. But the concept is exactly right. Yeah, and I saw this, again, proliferating during my final years in banking. The folks we would speak to as buyers of technology companies were surprising relative to 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. The folks that we would call to discuss a transaction, the list would grow, and we'd kind of go stretch our norms in terms of who might be the acquirers. And increasingly, I think the acquirers, as in the case of this McDonald's transaction, are non-technology companies. And I think you'll see more of that.
Your take on that?
I think that's exactly right. You're seeing, I think what you said earlier about the not invented here having gone out the window is exactly the way to look at this, because that's certainly the attitude that prevailed, I think, maybe pre-financial crisis or before it all became clear exactly how impactful digital technologies are. One of my favorite slides, stolen last year by Prime Minister of Israel, is to look at market cap companies of 10 years ago, of which I think 6 were oil companies, and of today, of which there are no oil companies and there are 6 technology companies. So that's clearly the way that things are trending, and even businesses that are completely outside of the digital economy are understanding that.
In our last couple moments, Sanjay, maybe to you first, kind of wrapping up our panel a little bit, would you be able to offer a glimpse into, we talked about maybe the not too distant future, 5 or 10 years ahead, either a prediction or a trend or something that maybe the audience isn't yet thinking about, be that second order or otherwise?
And sorry to go back to Hyperloop, but there's another sort of untold vision around Hyperloop, which is how the company is being built. This is a company that has about 50 employees globally. I'm employee number 50. We have 800 people around the world that work for the company who we call contributors. These are folks who have full-time jobs, probably been in their profession for 30 or 40 years in many cases, and they're contributing their time to parts of our solution. They may be experts in engineering, aerospace, aeronautics, design and construction, et cetera, and they contribute their spare time to our effort, and in return for that, they get stock in the company, direct stock. And that sort of notion of building an ecosystem of contributors so you get the best talent in the world working on a global project is something I think is, on a global scale, is quite amazing. For years, we've talked about open source software, right? You look what happened with GitHub and Microsoft, Waze, et cetera, that's been acquired. Think about open source everything. And can you do large global projects by borrowing from the intellect across the globe? Because although I've been in San Francisco for 25 years, I know it doesn't all exist here.
Michael, a similar question. What's something that's on your mind as we look now kind of 5 or 10 years ahead?
Well, I take the scooter example again. 2 years ago, nobody would have, they thought scooters were for kids, walking to school. And now they're actually a way that most of our employees at Maniv get to work. And so, these things sometimes come up on you unexpectedly. But I think what digitization and these technologies introduce is really the ability for this creativity to proliferate. We're certainly seeing that in Israel, both on the B2B side and also increasingly, I think, on the B2C side as it comes to mobility solutions. So I think we're just going to continue to see more of it.
That's amazing. So in conclusion, if you're interested in Hyperloop, Sanjay has all the answers. If you're interested in Israel and mobility, Mike has all the answers. With that, round of applause for our amazing panel. Thank you, gentlemen, so much.
Thank you.